This is the fourth session of Mixes. Are you ready for the circular future? And today we're going to be talking about textile materials. And we are very happy to have Jo Conlon with us, who is a senior lecturer at the University of Manchester. I will let Jo introduce herself, but we're excited because she is lecturer, kind of teaching both under and postgraduates. But what is very special about her is that she has also very extensive, let's say, operational experience on materials. So we're happy to be able to give her the floor and share her views on materials. So what we're going to do is there is her presentation for the first part of the session. During the presentation, feel free to put your questions in the chat, and then there will be plenty of time for Q&A at the second part of the presentation. And if there's any other problems during the session, let us know. So, Jo, please.
Thank you.
The floor is yours.
So thank you for that kind introduction. Thank you for the opportunity to talk today, and thank you to everybody for joining us today. So I'm Dr. Jo Conlon. I am a senior lecturer here at the University of Manchester, but before that, my degree was also from Manchester, and I studied textile technology, and then I went to work in the industry in the supply chains of Marks and Spencers, who were very advanced many years ago in their approach to supply chains. So it was my job to onboard new suppliers, to ensure that suppliers were compliant, and to do all those pre-production checks. And I love textiles. I still love textiles even now. I sort of transferred about 15 years ago to being an academic. So what we see now is massive amount of overproduction, pollution, exploitation within the supply chains, and an over-reliance on fossil fuels. And that we now can all see that there is now a burning platform for fashion to really change its approaches very quickly. But equally, we're seeing that businesses are struggling with this pressure of looming legislation, this imminent and increased scrutiny that they're getting in a time when trading is also very tough. So what I want to do today is to help businesses find some space and find some good resources to help them with that burden of starting to deal with the process from the beginning, from the raw materials stage. Sorry, my Teams chat line's opening as well, because materials matter. So what we're going to do today is I'm going to try to make the case for people to have more textile technology knowledge, to share my passion for raw materials with you. I'm going to just narrow that passion down to a very few fibers, which I see as the core way forward. I'm going to talk about circularity and how fibers need to be considered within a circular economy. I'm going to touch on preferred fibers. That's really what examples of what good looks like today. And we're going to do cotton, regenerated cellulosics, polyester, and wool. And then I'm going to share with you some resources to get you started. So that means that perhaps if you wanted to come today and learn about new innovations in fibers, that will have to be another occasion, because we're going to start with the majority of the raw materials that we've got in production at the moment. And then we will also touch on innovations in the questions or separately afterwards. So for fashion and textiles, the gateway SDG goal is number 12, and I like to switch this around, because I think it should be responsible production and then consumption, because I think the responsibility should be with businesses rather than with consumers. So consumers are trying to do their best, but as we all know, even if we work in a business, staying ahead of this curve is very difficult. So And also that it's the level of impact that you can see from this slide is that we really need to begin to focus on scope 3 emissions. So they're the emissions that aren't in your head office, that aren't in from your energy and everything that you're running in your head office. They are from your supply base. Now, unfortunately, most businesses do not actually know where their raw materials come from. So beyond the garment factory, out into textile processing and into weaving and knitting and raw materials, it all gets much more complex, much more switched about, and it's much harder to follow. Just gonna wait for that to be muted. So this is the part of the problem, is that our supply chains are so extensive, so complex, and so interconnected. It makes all that kind of mapping that we need to do and the analysis that we need to do very complicated. And really, for textiles, there is a data gap. We just do not have the data within these factories to be able to make some of the decisions that we need to. So beyond perhaps greenhouse gas emissions and the importance, obviously, of getting to net zero, there are other considerations within our supply chain. So we also have to think about the people and ensure that they are able to work with dignity within our supply chains. And we also have to think about the planet in terms of its soil and biodiversity as well. So if you can see from this image here, the raw materials stage and then onto the processing stage, which also we can't cover today, even though I'd like to do it, have the massive impact. So I want to encourage everybody to think from the beginning of the cycle in order to make correct choices and to make informed choices about how you can progress. Oh, moved on all by itself. So just a little lesson in how fibers are classified. So they are in two strands, really, two categories. We have natural fibers and we have manufactured fibers, sometimes called man-made fibers, but being a feminist, I changed that to manufactured fibers. So, but it's still got man in it, hasn't it? But anyway, so natural fibers, two classifications: from plants or vegetables or from animals. And then in manufactured fibers, we have, again, two categories. So synthetic fibers, which are coming from fossil fuels. So they're all the polymers that we know: polyester, polyamide, elastane. And then we also have manufactured fibers but they tend to come from a cellulosic base. So that tends to be from trees and wood pulp, but it can come from other cellulosic materials. And that can also be manufactured into like a cotton-like substitute. And we will talk about that more later. So what I would just want to say while we're on this natural versus man-made diagram is, very often people make a very simplistic view that natural is naturally good. So that we you know, being close to nature, yes, lovely, but doesn't actually mean that a natural fiber has actually had any consideration for the people or the animals or the soil within that supply chain. It's an oversimplification to think of as natural as good. Equally, it's an oversimplification to think of as manufactured as bad. And this is part of the dilemma that we have around this debate, is that the dialogue, as we often see in our societies, is becoming very polarized and good, bad, and simplistic. And unfortunately, the picture is much more complex than that, which requires us to do some digging, to do some thinking, and to assess it for our own strategic goals. So I would just like to leave you with that, because we will be coming back to good versus bad. So then this is, I've deliberately chosen there is an updated version of this chart, but it isn't in a nice line. So I've chosen the nicest picture here, because I think it shows wonderfully how much of our fibers, global fibers, is synthetic. So polyester here, a very large chunk, more than half. And then add to that polyamide, we're coming up to 60%. Then a proportion that's cotton. And then the MMCF stands for man-made cellulosic fibers. And then you also have other fibers and wool and down, etc. And I think it also shows you the journey that we're making towards more responsible routes. So recycled polyester, responsibly sourced cotton, those kinds. This is the journey that we're on. And then just probably another point to make is that this is a journey. So these benchmarks are evolving, and as we learn more and as we think about it more, there is an upgrading of these benchmarks and these decisions to make. But this is a really wonderful resource that I will include at the end. So if we, from that point, that was my starting point. So for me, I want to talk today about those main fibers that are in production. So I want to talk about polyester, I want to talk about cotton, and I want to talk about man-made cellulosics, and then I will finish on wool before sharing with you some resources. So before we get there, I want to talk about the circular economy, because this is, again, going back to the family tree of natural and of manufactured fibers. If we look on the biological side, this is where our natural fibers should live and exist. And hopefully we can just recycle them. So that's one of the cycles. Then if we look on the other side, the technical loop, should be recyclable, so that we should be able to use synthetic polymers and recycle them. This is possibly the root of some of the issues around polyester, because this perhaps optimistic or future, hopefully, of this technical loop that resources could go round and round infinitely hasn't actually been the case. What we've actually seen is that we're using precious resources of fossil fuels, and we are just continuing to use the linear take, make, waste method. So polyester isn't designed to be recycled infinitely. It has different chemicals in it, which mean that sometimes it is actually being downgraded. But I think we can get to a stage where we could go back to this original plan for the circular economy. The key thing here is that it's like a Ghostbusters thing. It's like you don't cross the streams. So that's the way to remember it. So we have to keep these categories separate. So things that are blended, so that's putting, stretch fibers like elastane into cotton, or putting, polyviscose or polycotton. These blends are very, very difficult to recycle. We already know that we're recycling insufficient of our produced fabrics, but when we make a blend, and an intimate blend, we make it even harder. So one of the considerations for when we're designing at the beginning is to try to remember that we should be designing for a circular economy, and to keep those sectors separate. So then to talk about polyester. So sadly, most of our polyester is still being produced from virgin polyester. And even the good part, which is the recycled polyester, the mechanically recovered polyester, comes from plastic bottles. So those plastic bottles weren't designed to ever be a fiber. So they were designed to be a plastic bottle, and they contain some harmful chemicals, which the design of a plastic is an unintended consequence of it entering the fiber cycle. And there are some new polyesters coming on stream, which will allow us to be chemically recover them, and there are some new cleaner polyesters coming online as well, and also some bio-based polyesters. But the majority of polyester is still coming from virgin polyester, and it's still being used for disposable garments. So really, I think a question for us is in a society that has managed to ban single-use plastic bags and single-use plastic straws, why are we still allowing a precious resource like fossil fuels to be made into very cheap disposable clothing? But I will make a counter argument for polyester in a second. So This is going to be an interesting discussion because polyester is divisive. So there are people like me that came from a circular economy background and could see its potential to be infinitely recycled. But we also live in a real world where that actually hasn't happened. We're still making disposable fashion, and we're not using the circular model. But equally, everything that is made of polyester, equally everything that is made of plastic is made, and it's not going anywhere. It's just going to be here for forever. So I think there is a strong argument for us dealing with that textile waste and that fiber waste, and to try to keep it out of landfill and certainly out of incineration. Yes, perhaps we are currently downcycling things, and there are issues regarding the fact that it is lower quality and more expensive. But we have to get to a place where we are scaling these issues, scaling these fibers, so that we can eventually begin to get to that truly circular model. As I said, there are new innovations coming through in polyesters, which will eliminate some of the issues around, for example, about microplastics. You know, there's lots that you can do in the production process to help avoid that. And then there's sort of like a trade-off about, you know, polyester is very durable. So it will last and last for forever. So, you know, if you were to think of some of the garments maybe from the 1980s, those beautiful Japanese ishimaki garments were made of plissé pleating. There's many people still loving and wanting them. That was kind of the ambition for polyester. It can make wonderful structural garments that stay looking fresh, very durable. You know, equally for, you know, for hard wearing garments, if you've got children and you know, you need something that's hard wearing and durable, polyester's got a lot of strengths to it as well. So it's really, yes, what I'm trying to say, the case I'm trying to make is that while we're in this transition, I think there is room for greater debate about positive uses for polyester, because a bit like the natural good and synthetics and bad, I think that demonizing polyester isn't part of a healthy debate, and I think we need to have you know, more discussions about that. So perhaps we'll get to that later. So then let's move to cotton. So equally, just as we saw, as there were so many variations in polyester, there is equally, it's very hard to judge cotton, because cotton is a plant that grows naturally. It grows in different areas all around the world. And as we know, weather changes around the world. And so different times we have more rainfall or less rainfall. And therefore, this sort of perhaps a desire for a neat way to classify and find the right solution is in fact very difficult. So the recommendation is that when you're looking at cotton and any life cycle assessments, and you look over a 3 to 5 year period, because of some of these variables that happen. So the conditions, as we know, vary from year to year, from region to region, the species or cultivar of cotton that's being grown, what water is being used. Is it rain-fed or is it through an irrigation system? What type of irrigation system? How is the waste of the crop dealt with? You know, in some places that can be burnt off. Obviously not something we want to see, but, you know, how is that managed? It's not just about the cotton, it's about the whole plant. What fertilizers are used, pesticides, herbicides, insecticides, and the impacts of those, just how the land is managed, how it's harvested, and then the first stage of fiber production into ginning. So there's so many variables that this is one of the complexities of life cycle assessment. It doesn't really allow us to identify all of these variables. We're very much on the journey towards that. But having said that, mechanically recycled cotton is the most favored low impact source, but it has to be blended with cotton. Currently, it's stated that you can do between a 20 and a 50% blend, but I think most places are blending 20% of recycled cotton with 80% either conventional or organic cotton. But there are some really helpful guidelines on how you can try to reduce the impact through farming, and what the kind of things that you can be looking for, which are stated there. And then in terms of like looking more broadly, how, organic will have a good impact on the soil, regenerative practices even more so. And we have to start to build in that bigger picture of biodiversity into these discussions as well. One of the confusing factors which has recently come through in the press was about the claim that organic cotton uses less water, and little bit like the last slide, is really, it depends where it was being grown. If organic cotton has tended to be grown in a naturally wetter area, then it will need less water because it's being watered naturally by natural rainfall in that region. So what I'm really trying to say is it's just more confusion really, rather than more complexity, rather than a simple one solution that you can look for and run with. But we do have from the Textile Exchange preferred cotton options, and there are 16 programs that are supported at the moment, and they're listed there. So they would be the first part that you would need to be looking at, and then you would need to align them with what you want to do in your business as well, because there are different social impacts for some of those decisions that you may be making. But the big thing is that the challenge of the Textile Exchange was to encourage all these new and better preferred cotton options, and to get us to be 50% of market share by next year. And currently we are only 25%. So, this is something that we could really get behind. Yes, organic cotton is going to need a transition, but there are lots of other things, fair trade cotton, all these different preferred cottons that you could be making as a good first choice and supporting that direction of travel. So finally, let's get to the last two. So we're going to start by looking closely at this benchmark of fibres, which was from Made By, and their analysis that they did over the 6 parameters that are at the bottom of the slide. And I put it here just to flag how not just raw material choice, but the processing of that fiber can have a massive impact, because we're going to talk about regenerated cellulosics or man-made cellulosic fibers. So if we look in class B, and we look towards the bottom, we can see Tencel, a lensing lyocell product. And then if we go across to the right-hand side and we look down, we can see generic viscose, we can see bamboo viscose, and we can see other rayons. And that's a massive swing from almost at the top of the table to the bottom of the table from a very similar raw material source. And that is due to the fact that that the viscose process itself is very chemically damaging. It wasn't closed loop, uses a lot of energy, and it has lots of chemical emissions, hazardous chemical emissions. So it was classed as E. We will also, while we're just here, but just hold this thought for a second, we will also look at wool, which is again was classified as E, and we will talk about the contentiousness of that shortly too. So we have, in terms of the progress on man-made cellulosics, it's really, really positive. There's lots of really good things happening in this space. So, and this is a really excellent benchmark for finding those good sources of better viscose, and certainly some measured against some of these the management of forests being really important, that we have good stewardship of forests, that it's well documented, that and equally good chemical management of the processes and the chemicals within that viscose process. Because although we've all seen bamboo clothing, and we all know that bamboo grows rapidly, and it will grow rapidly in areas that aren't suitable for farming of crops, when we put it into this traditional viscose process, that is why it's sitting in category E. And so that we do need to understand not only the raw material, but how it's processed into a fiber. And benchmarks and scales like this are really, really helpful. So then to move back to the top of the table, let's go to Tencel lyocell, which is a really well-established regenerated cellulosic developed in the 1980s. And it's now rapidly being scaled around the world. And it does two things. It has very good stewardship of forests, so from well-managed transparent forests, and also closed loop chemical process. So it uses less water, uses less land to grow, and a bit like bamboo, the eucalyptus tree, which is the raw material, will grow on pretty terrible ground around the world as well. So Tencel lyocell is an excellent substitute for cotton and for silk. Very comfortable against the skin, very absorbent, those kinds of things. Then wool. So this is another contentious one because it was classed in the benchmark as E, but as wool farmers around the world protested really that not all wool is the same. So pretty much like the picture for cotton farming, wool farming is obviously different around the world. So you can have let's imagine a very nice Scandinavian flock making beautiful wool for local spinning and weaving. That's definitely got a lot less impact than the conventional wool that is in most of the mass market. But unfortunately, again, even with excellent benchmarks, there is a generalization that is built in. So what should you be looking for in wool? So I think it's generally recognized that we need to care for animals, that meat, if we're farming animals for meat, that has an impact around the world as well. And these animals give off methane gas through their digestive system, which is contributing to their greenhouse gas emissions. So you can have, a carbon impact or an animal welfare concern. But there are now really good guidelines which are listed here for you to find responsibly sourced wool and what kind of things and practices to be avoiding. And then it's up to you really to think about what your actual supply chain around the world looks like. Because wool does have lots of natural, inherent good properties. It's biodegradable. Sheep also can be farmed on hillsides that can't be used for agricultural. It's, there's no microplastic. So, for every argument for, I'm suggesting there is an argument against. And until we have a standardized way of reviewing life cycle assessments at the very, very granular level, there'll always be these decisions to be made. So to wrap up, I want to leave you with three thoughts. Firstly, I think it's really important that we stay ahead, not wait for this legislation to drop on us, to try to get ahead. And I leave you with some of the excellent fibre resources that I've used for this presentation here. So from the Fashion Industry Charter for Climate Action, from the Textile Exchange, the Common Objective has some wonderful webinars that you can also follow to update yourself on your fibre knowledge. And then, eventually this is going to go into sustainability reporting. And I found the KPMG survey really helpful to prepare for some of the future reporting that will come our way. Then the second thing is a start, really. This is going to be a journey. It's going to be a long journey. And you can only start with where you are and what you want to do and the fibres that you're using. So you need to do an as is. What fibres are you using? Where do they come from? What are your future trajectory for fibre use and sourcing around the world? What do you know about your supply chain back from through the different tiers of garment manufacturing? So, you know, looking that way through the supply chain, and then also from reality to aspiration where you want to be. So each of us needs to plan from our project from as is to be in the future, and I encourage you to make a start. But I've been doing this for a long time now, so I worked out that from the very first Earth Summit, I've been working in this area since that very first Earth Summit, which shows you like I'm 100 years old. And I think this is probably one of the most exciting times. There have been times when I've found it very hard to work in fashion and textiles because of the impacts of the supply chain. But I'm very excited that we now have some tools coming through that can really help us fill this data, this dearth of data that we have in textiles. And I've put 3 links on here that you can fill that you can follow through on later. So firstly, there is a tool from Natific. It's called the Bombler tool. And what that does is it actually helps you fill in your details of your supply chain. And it, you know, down to, you know, if you're using a tea styrene vessel, it will know, you know, what the energy for that is in the country it's located. And it helps you to build that pattern up. It's fantastic. And then another tool which links to you know, perhaps some of our prototyping needs to be done virtually. So Frontier have a fabric creation, which you can basically scan a real fabric and create a virtual fabric from it. The clever part is that it will connect with some life cycle assessment from made to flow, and so that you can build, if you were a textile producer, you can build your a beautiful digital library with proper information. And then finally from Lensing, the link that, but not the picture, is on there, which is Textile Genesis, which flips this. Like we from traceability, we've always gone back from the finished product and tried to kind of hunt around the world to where it came from. What Textile Genesis does, which is genius is that it starts at the beginning and it tracks that raw material forwards. So I think that's also very positive. So I wanted just to encourage you that there are tools around that are bringing potential solutions to the market, to collaborate together, because this is something we're all going to have to do together. We can't do it in isolation. We need to be much more collaborative, but to stay optimistic, because optimism is catchy. So then finally, please don't hesitate to get in contact with me. I'm just launching a website, and I will start putting a newsletter out on regularly on this kind of stuff going forward. You can find my Manchester contact details there, me on LinkedIn, and then a blatant plug for my book, which comes out with my colleague Charlene Gallery next month, which is some of the digital tools that I've taken from you. So I'm going to finish there and look forward to talking with you all.
Great, thank you so much. I think you gave us more than enough food for thought there. And
oh, hold on, has that stopped sharing?
Yes, it
okay,
did.
cool.
We're all here now, so we can jump onto the questions, and there were a few, at least on the chat already. Maybe I just pick, there was a little bit of theme that you just touched there at the end of the presentation. I'll just bring that one first. And anyone there who was on the chat who were talking about this more like a data, there was a digital passport, and you mentioned there that the issue of like almost like tracking the garment either from the end product point of view versus then the suppliers. So can we dig a bit deeper on that? How do you see that digitalization part of it? Maybe specifically the digital product passport. Do you see that as one almost like a revolutionary thing that can help move forward, or are there other things you think it can sort of
I think it's, again, like there's no one fiber that's going to be right. There isn't going to be one digital tool that's going to fix everything. I think we have to start thinking for like a spectrum of solutions. But digital product passport is really exciting, because I think what it does is it puts the power in the hand of the consumer, so that they can, you know, show interest in this, they can trace it. And then I think we've all seen that, you know, the consumer voice is the most important. So, you know, people getting these DPP, using them, activating, asking questions, I think it is absolutely really a really strong part of the solution, but it needs data. So without so it's a little bit like you know, blockchain is another brilliant solution, but it sits on a platform of data, and we don't have that data yet, and we don't have that data all the way back through the supply chain. So I think it's really important that we think about how we can build rapidly data from the raw material forward in the supply chain, and whatever tool will help us do that, I think we should all back them.
Yeah, very good. So yeah, let me go to the questions, and we can maybe come back to some of the sort of the future thinking at the end, and those changes. But there was some few of them, the questions that were very specific. So Kwang Kyun was asking about the class. If you know, you had the presentation, you had the slide with class from A to however long they went.
Yeah, from A to E.
Yeah, Kwang, if you're there, do you want to ask your question? Do you want to come here? He's basically asking that I thought class C is more sustainable than class B.
No, it starts the other end. A is the top, and down the chain. So yeah, the most. So I think you'll see, without flicking back to the style, it's like all the recycled products are in class A, but it's quite an interesting question. It's like based on the parameters of which the analysis was done, but there were 6 parameters in there. So I think your step would need to be is to go and have a look at the methodology, decide whether you think that's an appropriate methodology, and then whether that fits for your actual specific fiber. Because as the example with wool, there are some regional variations depending on your supply chain in that. So it's a good guide as anything. You know, these boxes aren't real. They're just like from A to E. They're a guideline to encourage you to think about how things could be categorized to help you inform that decision making. But you have to dig into the methodology. You have to dig into your supply chain. But yes, the scale actually goes from A, best, E, worst.
Yeah, thanks. And yeah, for anyone, there were a couple of questions about sharing the everything that you shared. So yes, we're going to be sharing the recording over an email then for everyone, so you will be able to get back to the details in Jo's presentation. So that was I'm just looking if there was other, and please put your hand up if you want to ask the question directly. So you can do that as well. There was something around Charles Rose. You had a long comment there. Do you want to come on and talk
Hello,
about
Charles.
yourself?
Happily, if you can hear me, Jo.
I can. Hello,
Jo. I enjoyed that, but it was too good. So sorry, these are very high-level questions, and I hope everyone's going to catch up. One is on the future of the synthetic yarns, carbon capture synthetic yarns. Are they just a bit of a diversion? Such a little petrochemical that we take out of the ground actually goes into clothing in the first place. My philosophy, although we're going to capture, I think it's 30 megatons of carbon in the UK every year by the end of this decade, shouldn't we just refine that and put it into jet fuel that we're using an awful lot of, rather than try and divert such a small percentage to make clothing? Are we just trying to wrap ourselves up in nice marketing, and actually the best thing would be just to make fuel? So that was the first question.
No, let's just stick with that. Let's do them in order. So I agree with your sentiment, which is very often that some of these innovations actually appeared to be a distraction, which is why I focused on the 4 fibers which we currently have in production, because equally some of these innovations, again, are really good marketing. And yes, when they come on stream, they will be brilliant solutions, but they're not out of the lab, they're not scaled, and we still have an awful lot of textiles in the world already. So then your next question, which was about flying, which surely is something we should be trying to avoid. I really don't know, because I'm not an aviation specialist. But yes, I think your main question is some of these sequestering carbon like a good news story for continuing with our poor practices in traditional polyester? And I think that's probably a yes. But I think there is a lot of good work being done to work with polyester, and that we should be encouraging. So I don't really want to slam people who are trying to do things.
Jo, I think we both agree, if you don't iterate, we don't know what we will turn up.
Yeah.
But if I could go to a completely different area and hold
Please do.
your presentation, isn't our problem with clothing, it makes us really happy, proud, and confident. So it gives us good vibes.
Yes.
And the individual footprint of apparel, every item you're wearing, is really quite low. Our problem is the churn, the amount we get through, and that is encouraged by the low price. When
Absolutely.
you and I were kids, food and clothing was a lot more expensive. Now they have both sunk in relative terms. We have the explosion of fast food, we have the explosion of fast fashion. So the question is, should we be trying to change the behavior, the churn of getting through so much clothing?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think we are. So I think one of the biggest things that absolutely has changed churn is apps like Vinted and Depop. So I know lots of young people who do not buy new clothes because they are very concerned, rightly so, about the planet, and therefore we have to so they've done masses, because now you're seeing take back schemes. Nobody knows what they're going to do with it yet, but we're taking it back, and we're understanding that we're going to have extended producer responsibility for garments. You're going to have to take it back. You're going to have to deal with it. So that will force better design practices of like designing for circularity, modular design, encouraging people to keep it for longer, encourage people not to buy but to rent. So yeah, I think all of these new models will come in, but you have to remember, and that's why I'm so heartened by things like vintage, because if you're of the typical vintage age group under 25, you've only ever known fast fashion. That strikes me as bizarre. But these people are younger than Google. They're younger than fast fashion, so they've only ever known the norm. They do not yes, when we were children, it was normal for us to have hand-me-downs, and I think that is now coming back. That school uniforms are kept at schools, and the next year of children wear those school uniforms, and that stigma about wearing second-hand is gone, because people, second-hand as first choice through apps, and all the cool kids wearing vintage has really done a lot for stopping that churn.
And
thank you. That's all.
Thanks, Charles.
Yeah, I wanted to just jump on that one. Is that obviously you see young people in your classrooms. Like, do you see, like, have you seen sort of a change, or how do you see that from their perspective? Because you see them.
Yes, definitely. I think there are definitely lots of young people in Manchester. It's a big student city who are clearly not wearing new clothes, and they're looking very unique, very stylish, which I love to see. And they're also upcycling, or painting on charity items, recreating things, upcycling things. But it's not everybody. So equally, there is still a huge proportion of the population, young and old, who is still buying from fast fashion and ultra fast fashion. And I think that the only way to change that is legislation. I don't see an end to it. any other way.
Yeah. Okay, let's take. There was Mike Parsons who.
Hi, Mark.
Hi. I rather liked Charles Ross's approach. I know Charles very well, and everybody.
Hello, matey.
Yeah. Okay, Charles. I'm from the Manchester area and born and bred in the textile area, and as I teach outdoor people about garments and how to keep warm and dry. What I find so shocking is there is a complete and total disappearance of any understanding whatsoever of the not merely the fibers and text there, but simply the difference between a weave and a knit and so on. And even journalists writing up about garments and so on do not know the difference. They will confuse. And in the context of keeping warm and dry, then there are critical differences between a knit, a weave, and a braid, and a non-woven. They are the fundamentals of what outdoor garments are about. But finally, to finish on the fact that you haven't mentioned the dreaded F word, fluoros.
I didn't because I was only doing raw materials. I wasn't doing finishes or dye stuffs or anything today. So yeah,
fluoros are raw materials.
Yeah, no, I mean, but would be applied to a finished textiles.
Yeah, they are applied to finished textiles because yeah. So it's 22 or 23 years since Greenpeace blew the whistle on fluoros, and it's the outdoor industry, which is the industry I'm from, has pretended to be so good about doing things, but it's only in the last year has excluded the use of fluoro compounds for the DWR finish and so on. And so outdoor garments are a vast mix of chemicals. And as all the changes that you predict are coming along, the performance characteristics of the product will shift considerably.
They will.
And less.
But equally, we have like things like weaves like Ventile fabric, which windproof, and I think yes, you're talking to somebody who loves textiles and believes that there's not enough people know about textiles. I completely agree with you. But so perhaps the question is, how do we get people who want to work in the industry interested in understanding fibers and performance and finishing and dyeing, because we don't see a lot of interest in that. Certainly fashion and textiles courses, for undergraduates are very design focused. We're not really covering these. At Manchester, we do that. We see that as our USP. But and the way me and my colleagues do it is like you're going to go into the industry. If you don't understand these things, you are not an informed buyer, and you will be ripped off or make bad decisions or whatever. So it has to be about that for that future, that use. But there hasn't been much education, has there?
No. We had this problem when I was teaching at Lancaster University, and we were teaching innovation and the history of technology, not just textiles, but all technology. And we brought in an outside resource from time to time. And one of the outside resources talked about textiles and their use in aircraft and aircraft bodies and bikes and so on. And the students reported a dramatic change in their perspective of textiles because they had perceived it as a sunset industry. And that is one of the problems we've had, and that's one of the problems we have suffered from because of governmental policies here in the UK.
I agree.
Sorry to introduce politics, but and what we see is the major innovations have come from USA because the USA government requires military and other procurement to be from results, and so they have continued to have a viable industry, whereas sadly, everything I knew.
Yeah, me too. As I graduated, lots of our
disappeared.
Lots of our manufacturing disappeared. But there is again, let's try to stay optimistic. I think that given legislation, given people's increased view of business risk, of long supply chains, given consumer concerns or a desire to know the provenance of products, I think there is a window for manufacturing closer to home. The UK, in Europe, where it's had a much more proactive and supportive government policies for manufacturing generally, not just textiles. But yeah, I think there is a window for reshoring because of those concerns. And but I think we need to be quick, because I agree with you, as businesses, trading's tough and businesses are finding it very difficult.
Yeah, and thanks for that. I think this is a great topic, maybe even for another, because exactly this production, that the fact that we've kind of taken the production outside of our, like, Europe, first of all, that how can we, or where is this going? And obviously we discussed this, that Manchester being back in the day the place where a lot of this development and industry actually kicked off, and making a lot of wealth over there. But things have turned out differently. But is there actually a way to bring some of that back? But just being conscious of the time, because we're getting towards the end, there was just a topic that I wanted to bring here that I think it was partly put on the comments as well. Let me just rephrase that, in the sense that I guess we speak about the complexity and durability. So, we touched upon that. I just had to bring this this topic to say, because we can sort of say that the polyester for sporting goods, for example, is great because there's this element of durability, versus then obviously with fast fashion we start to see the quality of cotton, for example, to degrade, and problems with that, for example, that the resale industry suffers from this quality problems that we start to see. This is obviously a broad question, but how do you see that? Like, what could we do better as an industry to kind of, one hand, like drive the development of the right places to use perhaps the polyester on those places where it is good, and we obviously, the durability is something that we're kind of tackling with. So you take that as a
absolutely. There's two things there. One of this touches on what Mike was saying, is about like a lack of understanding that you can get durability from changing a weave from a plain weave to a twill weave to make it more hard wearing, and we don't really have that kind of knowledge. But because what we've done, and what this was my job really, was to take price out of fabrics. So we to take, you make it lighter, you use lower quality yarns, did all the tricks in the trade, as well as just moving it around the world. And that has consequences of quality, which we've seen. So price is the problem, but I think part of the solution is the extended producer responsibility scheme, because if you're responsible for taking it back and dealing with that very low quality, questionable, recyclable fiber, then it's the true cost, or the total cost of the life cycle of a product, becomes much more than the point of sale. So this is going to be difficult for consumers, isn't it, and for retailers to manage that. Like, we've got used to incredibly cheap clothing. We all know it's too cheap, and that's not just workers' exploitation, that is quality of fabrics and fibers as well. So I think through the take back scheme and having to deal with that waste will push quality back up the agenda, so that we will be thinking for the life cycle of a garment, how it can be truly recycled, and then quality will improve. You get less, well, I used to use the phrase I won't use the phrase, but less poor quality fabrics that we have, because producers have to be responsible for recycling it. I think that's the solution, and it can't come soon enough.
Yeah, and exactly. And I guess as well, that once the quality hopefully gets up, those what we love in the circular economy, that the those life events can be multiple. The resale and the garment, individual garment, can go from hand to hand or rented multiple times.
But I think retailers have got a responsibility for that, haven't they, as well? Because there's got to be a pull for this recycled fibre. So, you know, we saw Renewcell, you know, what happened? You know, it was working wonderfully. It was a wonderful idea. Nobody had a bad word, and it's failed. It's gone into receivership because there wasn't that willingness to presumably pay a bit more to do the right thing. And so, yeah, we're in that transition now, and hopefully with consumers getting on board, that will really push this, you know, in conjunction with appropriate legislation from across Europe and other places.
Yeah, indeed, lot to do,
lots to talk about.
So yeah, are there any last questions now? We would maybe have time for one more. So
there was just a question flashed up. I completely agree about overconsumption, and I think, you know, extending the life of garments through renting, through resale apps, whatever, definitely helps that, because fashion consumers have got used to being able to delight themselves or treat themselves with a new product. And I think this kind of resale market or rental market helps to fill that sort of buzz of retail therapy a different way. And I think that supporting those models is a really good way to move forward and cut down on overconsumption while still helping people with their fashion fixes that they have got used to.
And reducing the sourcing of raw materials, I guess.
In conjunction with circular, absolutely.
Yeah, as we see, the hard sort of facts at the moment is that the actual production is far from being on the trend of reducing, rather opposite. Phuong, do you want to ask a question quickly?
Hi, thank you so much for the really interesting, insightful presentation. And I worked a bit, I worked briefly within this, let's say, traceability, supply chain sustainability, supply chain sustainability. And I'm quite aware of the work of attendees. No, what is it called? I can never get the name because there are a couple that have similar names. But in any case, I particularly enjoyed what you were saying, that we're still in kind of in the initial period of pulling all the data that we've got, right? And it's very crucial. But another point is, from the conversation and from the questions of others, it seemed to me that economic incentives are something that is the most important to me for anyone, for the consumers. They need to feel that they are rewarded, going back to the traditional way of sharing, consuming less products. Producers need to produce less, but all of this meaning some certain investment or certain let's say modification in the business model, in the way that people or the companies would need to kind of benefit financially. So I just wonder what your view on this tricky situation as a potential solution.
I'm not, it's kind of like more of a statement really than a question, isn't it? I think we are in that transition stage. I think legislation from governments would help, you know, taxing to make up for the true cost of cheap fashion would help, I think, rather than perhaps a reward for, I'm not sure how a reward for not buying it could be enacted. But I think, I don't know, I'm really not sure where we will go with this, but yeah, I completely agree with you that something needs to be done to manage this.
Yeah, needs, I guess, collaboration in kind of many multiple levels on the consumer side, policy, plus the industry. But yeah, the hour is over. So unfortunately, we have to put a stop on the presentation and the discussion. So clearly, there's a lot to digest and a lot to learn and a lot to kind of act on, I guess. So thank you very much, Jo. It was really a pleasure to have you today.
Thank you for having me. And I absolutely mean, you know, if people want to connect with me, however way you want to do it, then please do. If you want to continue the conversation or ask further questions, I'm happy to help you.
Yeah, and we'll be emailing, and obviously feel free to jump on the LinkedIn chat under the event as well if you want to ask something additional. We're going to have our next session actually already next week on the 5th. And we're going to be talking about digital product passport. So that was the question someone had. So feel free, join that discussion next week. We're going to be sending over the recording shortly. And yeah, it was a pleasure to have everyone here and see you hopefully next week then.
Brilliant.
Brilliant. Bye.
Bye, everyone. Thank you.